In this video, we'll start looking at radical expressions. First of all, let's talk about the parts of a radical. When you have this root symbol, that's called your radical symbol. The number that's on the outside, kind of in the little groove of the root symbol, is called your index. The number that's underneath the radical symbol is called the radicand. And then the overall expression is called the radical. So we would read this as the cube root of 27. The index tells you what root you're taking. Now, when you're finding the radical of a number, the index of a square root is 2. So example, if we write square root of 4, we're looking for what number squared equals 4. So we would have the square root of 4 equals 2, since 2 squared is equal to 4. So whatever is out here as the index is going to be the exponent if you converted to the exponential form. If we see cube root of 64, we're looking for what number to the third power equals 64. So because that index is 3, we're looking for what number to the third power equals 64. So the cube root of 64 is going to equal 4. And that is because, or since, 4 cubed is equal to 64. Now, if you need to check, you can. I'm going to use desmos.com/practice. And I'll go ahead and do 4 to the third power, that's 64. So I can check my answer that way. If you need to do the nth root, you can use this nth root key, and then you can actually put in the index, and you can put in the radicand, the number underneath the root. So the cube root of 64. And that way you can use the calculator to evaluate the roots or to check your answer. If the index is an even number, then the radicand, the number under the root, must be positive. If the radicand is negative, we say that the result is not a real number. So for example, if I had the square root of -4, that would be not a real number. So square root of -4 is not a real number. Remember, a square root is an index of 2. If the index is an odd number, then the radicand can be positive or negative. So for example, if I had the cube root of -64, that would be -4. So if I have an odd index, it's okay to have a negative under the root. If I have an even index, it's not okay to have a negative under the root. Let's evaluate the following examples. So we have the 5th root of -32. And I want to think about what number raised to the 5th power is equal to -32. And you can actually use the calculator. So I have my calculator here. I'll go ahead and do this nth root button and put in the 5th root of -32. And I've got my result. It's -2. So the fifth root of negative 32 is equal to negative 2, and that's because negative 2 to the fifth power equals negative 32. So we were looking for what number to the fifth power equals the radicand. All right, for the second example, we have negative fourth root of 16. So it's an even root. The number underneath the radical is positive, so we're good to go. So my result will have the negative out front, and I want to figure out what the fourth root of 16 is. So if you're using the calculator, you go ahead and use that nth root button, and you'd put the fourth root of 16. The fourth root of 16 is 2, so my result is going to be negative 2 because I had that negative out front. So the negative comes from that negative that's out front of the radical. Square root of 16, what number squared equals 16? So the square root of 16 is 4. If you're using the calculator to evaluate a square root, then you don't need to use the nth root key. You use the square root key right next to it. So you do square root of 16. All right, and this last example, negative square root of negative 121. Now, because this is an even index, remember, the square root is an index of 2. So anytime you just see the square root, that's an even index. So the square root is index 2. So because I have an even index, the radicand cannot be negative. So an even index, so the radicand, the number underneath the root, cannot be negative. So as soon as I see square root of negative 121, I would go ahead and say that that is not a real number. All right, so that's how you evaluate radicals.